The Assembly has resumed its sitting. When we took the break, the Leader of the Opposition had completed his contribution. Does any other member wish to speak? The member for Northside.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a contribution to this historic bill before the House today. That is the Legislative Assembly Management Bill 2020. I have been an advocate, promoter, 100% supporter of separating this Legislative Assembly from the civil service administrative arm of government. This Honorable Legislative Assembly has progressed through a number of changes from the days when I was here in the 80s. In those days, we started off, the governor was also the presiding officer in this House, and the chief secretary was the leader of government business. We now have a speaker, and the premier is the leader of government business. All moves in the right direction, putting Caymanians in charge. But Mr. Speaker, I must say that it is rather ironic that in the days when the governor was a presiding officer, we were all punctual and showed ultimate respect and punctuality. When the governor walked through the back door of this House, all members were sitting in their seats. When he adjourned for lunch, and he said he was coming back if we adjourned at 12:30, we would come back at 2. When he walked through the back door, we were sitting in our seats. I long for the day that we offer that same kind of respect to our own, because they are no less deserving. If the Speaker says we're coming back at 1:30, we should be here in our seats awaiting the arrival of the Speaker at 1:30. Now today, Mr. Speaker, we are debating a bill that would set this Legislative Assembly up as an independent arm of government, just like the courts. So we will have the 3 separate arms of government: the court, the Legislative Assembly, the executive or civil service administration will all be independent in their decision-making process, although they must maintain a certain interdependence, supportive, and respective relationship with each other. Now, Mr. Speaker, while I fully support the separating of this Legislative Assembly from the civil service, I do have some concerns about certain provisions in this bill from a practical administrative approach. So, as I have always done in my term here in Parliament, I am not a lawyer. I don't read laws looking for legalese. I try to read laws and applying a practical approach and looking at how they are going to be implemented and how they are going to affect our people. I have always believed that I should not get up in this House and criticize something that the government is bringing without offering an alternative. So I have tabled, and I think they have been circulated to all members, a number of amendments to this bill, which I believe will make it a better bill. I have always believed that in separating the Legislative Assembly from the civil service administrative arm, we should do everything we possibly can to ensure that the staff who are currently civil servants retain all of their benefits, and any new staff coming in are entitled and receive those same benefits. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have to be careful, and we have some examples of what has happened when we have not sufficiently done that. We have some public authorities that went out on their own, took the staff out of Seneco, put it in the hand, their insurance in the hands of private insurers and the staff, sometimes without the staff support, at greater expense. There's one instance I know where one authority paid $78,000 CI the following year, more than what they were paying into Seneco. But because they had the ability to go to private doctors, etc., and they could go to doctors of their choice. Now, when those people are getting ready to retire, they have no retirement benefits. Their pension is questionable, because most of them, one of the big problems with the accounting and government and those authorities was their pension provisions and pension liabilities. So we now have to find a way to bring those people back in and provide those same retirement benefits that they no longer are entitled to. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to say something here. I want us, when we're talking about the provisions of this bill, to not consider motives. There are no motives on my part about what I am proposing as changes. They are not related to any person sitting in here or any person who might sit in here. It is related to what I believe is a system that should be put in place that will allow this assembly to be administered and managed in a way that we can be proud of, even if we're not here. I hope that none of the amendments that I have tabled are simply going to be eliminated by anybody because somebody has assumed that there is some motive, either ulterior or otherwise, either benefit for me or a benefit for somebody else or against somebody else, in the reason why I'm moving those motions. Because I believe that would be unfortunate and would not present us the opportunity in committee stage to adequately discuss what I believe are important things within the organization. Mr. Speaker, I will now deal with the bill clause by clause, and as I see that I believe changes can be made to make it better. And again, I am not talking about the legal language. I will need help maybe to put those changes that I envisage in proper legal language. But what I'm talking about is a system that we need to put in place. One of in part 2 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, I have filed an amendment to add a third subclause to clause 3, the Legislative Assembly Management Commission. Now, when we look to clause 2 and the definition of commission, commission means, in this law, means the Legislative Assembly Management Commission as established by Section 3. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't see how we can take people out of a commission to form a council if we haven't populated the people in the commission. So what I'm suggesting is that, in my view, I believe we have to add another subclause to that, which says that the Legislative Commission shall consist of all elected members of the Legislative Assembly. Because I believe that then sets the stage for the Commission to appoint, I would prefer elect, and that's I apply that amendment along, from amongst the members of the Commission, a council which manages the institution, not the day-to-day management of the institution. I don't see that as the role of the council. The role of the council, in my view, should be tantamount to a board of directors. And that board of directors will set policy, etc., and deal with the appointment of the speaker as part, who should be the CEO of the organization. And the CEO, with the consultation with the thing, should appoint the clerk and other staff members on the terms and conditions that the council has laid down under the rule structure, which are in full compliance with the Public Service and Management Law. So, and Mr. Speaker, in 4 subclause 2, the Premier, in moving the bill, said that the rules were subject to an affirmative resolution. Now, I don't know whether I have filed such an amendment to the bill, but I don't know whether the government had already filed that, because the current bill that I have says shall be subject to the negative resolution procedure. And I believe it should be affirmative, because we as politicians and legislators get accused enough of doing things behind closed doors, etc. Now, Mr. Speaker, as a student of organizational theory and behavior, and how these influence, determine, and affect efficiency, effectiveness, success or failure of organizational structures, I have some difficulty with organizational structure proposed in this bill and the makeup of the Council of the Commission. And Mr. Speaker, here we're dealing with Section 5, how the Council is established. The current provision says the Council shall comprise the Speaker, the Premier, the Leader of the Opposition, 3 members of the Legislative Assembly appointed in writing by the Speaker, acting in accordance with the advice of the Premier, 1 member of the Legislative appointed in writing by the Speaker, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, and the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly, ex officio, non-voting. Now, I find that to be too far a departure from how other standing committees are set up in the Legislative Assembly. I would like to see that council elected by the Legislative Assembly, as we do with the Public Accounts Committee, the House Committee, etc., etc., at the first meeting after an election, when the House is reconstituted, and it's for a 4-year term. And I believe for organizational, managerial, and structural integrity and performance, that the Premier should be the chairman of that council, with 2 other members from the government bench, including him, and the Leader of Opposition should be the deputy, with 1 person from the opposition bench along with him. So we have a 5-member commission. I don't think that it is going to be good for the organization to have the Speaker, who is the CEO and responsible for the day-to-day management of the legislature, to be the chairman of that council as well. Because I don't see this council being involved in the minutiae management of the Legislative Assembly. That's the role of the Speaker, assisted by the Chief Officer and the other members of staff. This council, as I envisage it, would probably meet maybe once a quarter in the original setting it up. And after that, would only meet when we're talking about budget, so that's every 2 years now. When we're talking about making changes to the rules, etc., right? Or other organizational structures that affect budgeting and bring about substantial change. I don't see that council involved in the actual paying of bills, recruiting of staff, etc., etc. I would like to see the council considered similar to a board of directors, right? And to borrow the example used by the Premier as the ombudsman is not the chairman of the supervising committee of the office of the ombudsman in this house. And Mr. Speaker, my concern is even greater if the Speaker does not happen to be a member of this Legislative Assembly. Because then we are really giving control up to somebody else. And we could well wind up in May next year for 10-9 government. 10 people in government, 9 people on the opposition bench. And in that case, the Speaker will have to come from the outside. Well, he rein us in here now, but he can't make us do no work. We can't leave the building, but we still ain't doing no work. One of the other concerns I have, and when we're setting up this organizational structure, I believe it is very important to pay close attention to the roles that people have within the organizational structure. I have concerns in clause 7, 2A, where we talked about how a member holds office and shall vacate office, where the member, and in 2A, it says the appointment is rescinded by the person making the appointment, and the person making the appointment resolves to appoint to the council instead of that member another member of the Legislative Assembly. Now that flies in the face of how even the current bill sets up the council. Because the members there are on the advice of the Premier and the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. But they're appointed by the Speaker. And if the Speaker can rescind the appointment of any one of those members, this does not link it back to if it's an opposition member or a government bencher that he gets advice from them. He can appoint whoever he wants. I would prefer to see that handled just like we handle the other standing committees. If there's a change to be made, it must be made by the Commission, all members of the Assembly. And as I said, I've also filed an amendment to change it from being appointed to being elected by the Commission. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to be a member of the committee that the Premier established in 2016. And anybody who was part of that committee will recall that one of the things that I insisted on in the deliberations was the protection of staff and that they retained their employment conditions. So I am troubled in 12, where it says power to appoint staff. It says the chief officer shall be responsible for employing at such remuneration and on such terms, conditions, including retirement medical benefits, as are equivalent to those set out under the Public Service Management Law 2018, such staff as the Council considers necessary to carry out the functions of the Commission. And then at 2, it says the chief officer shall be responsible for engaging persons under contract for services at such remuneration and on such terms and conditions as are equivalent to those set out under the Public Service Management Law for professional, technical, or other assistance as the Council considers necessary to carry out the functions of the Commission. Those 3 words, Mr. Speaker, trouble me. Equivalent to those. I would much prefer to say that it was in compliance with the Public Service Management Law, because equivalent can be a subjective thing. All of those in these authorities that were told we are going out to get a private sector to provide us with health insurance because you will be better off. Right? Now, when they find out they're really not better off, they're really in a terrible position when they get to retirement age. So my preference would be that we delete those 3 words in those 2 sections. I believe that that will have the effect of ensuring that the staff can be comfortable with what we're doing, and it would assure them that none of their employment conditions are going to be different from those that are in the civil service. And I think that's fair. And I think it should apply to new persons who are hired. Should be members of the government pension plan, members of the government health insurance plan, and have the same retirement benefits of a pension and health insurance coverage. And then, Mr. Speaker, I move to Part 4, General Grievance Procedure. And this one is even more troubling for me, because 18.1 says, the Council may, by rules made under Section 4, establish procedures for addressing grievances of staff, and those procedures shall be based on internationally accepted grievance procedures. And that international accepted is not identified. I think that shall be in accordance with the Public Service Management Law. Because, Mr. Speaker, again, not being a lawyer, but looking at the practicality of it, Section 19, Appeal of the Civil Service Appeals Commission, sets up the system that I believe should be in place. But with those wordings of based on international acceptance grievance procedures, that could be ILO standards. It could be some other standards from somewhere else. How are you going to convert then from the standards that exist there to appeal before the Civil Service Commission? I just think it should be consistent. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm probably going to commit political suicide. Definitely will be offering up some red meat for the Ezra haters, but be that as it may, my principles and my beliefs are what they are, and that has what has brought me so far. So tell all them Ezra haters to go ahead and yam the red meat. But I have always been, and always will be, a believer, an advocate, that MLA members of the Legislative Assembly should be properly and adequately paid, but it should be a transparent process. Mr. Speaker, you will know the battles I fought in when we were doing the 1988 budget. Well, we had tried it a couple of times before we didn't get through. But it was for the 1988 budget that we established proper salaries for MLAs linked to the civil service salary scale. Yeah, that's probably one of the reasons I lost the election. No, I won in 88. Don't worry about that, I won in 88. But I still have the file. Every dollar that I was paid as a salary between when it came into effect in January 1988 until election in November, I spent on a public beach at Cayman, and it is still standing. I never accepted a dime out of that salary for Ezra. And I still have the file home. But that's not the point. Everybody wants to see the best professionals elected to the Legislative Assembly. We cannot ask young, middle-aged, old folks like me to give up your profession to come in here and be a representative and not be properly compensated. So, Mr. Speaker, I have some difficulties with the rules in Schedule 1. I fully believe that the Premier is the top elected position in this country. It's not possible to be elected to anything higher, and that he should be paid at the top civil service salary scale. I think he should be in that scale. I think he should start off 2 points from the top. My amendment says A4, because at that time it was 1 to 5. I understand it may be some changes, and that number had to change. Because he is limited to 2 terms. So he should start 1 point below the top, and if he gets elected for his second term, he gets the top salary. We cannot do what we're doing in this bill, which says earns 10% more in base salary than the deputy governor and receives an increment for every 4 years term completed as Premier. But here's the problem with that. That's okay as long as you have a deputy governor who's been a couple of years. But under this scenario, here's what could happen. The Premier is in his final term. We got a new deputy governor who starts at A1. What are we going to do then? Bring the Premier down in the B? You understand the practicality of what we're doing here? Right? Because this will force you to cut the Premier salary, because it can't be more than 10% more than the deputy governor. And I think that's an artificial limitation that we should not accept and we should not tolerate. Same thing with the deputy Premier. Earns 5% more in base salary than the deputy governor. I think all of these should be except for the Premier and the Speaker, and I'll get to the Speaker on the B, should start at the bottom. And for every 4 years that you're in here, you get one increment. Now, it ain't the civil servant that has a better performance report than us who win election, you know. Because if you're not performing, you're not getting elected. So we're not saying it should be every year. We're saying one increment for every 4 years, because we're going out in May next year and find a test, and we are going to be tested as to our performance. I agree with the ministers being in salary scale B. If you're your first term minister, you start at B1. Every 4 years, you get an increment. I don't agree with the rule here that at the discretion of the Premier may earn additional increments on grade B, but shall again not earn more than the Deputy Governor. We keep coming back to this civil service equality. Something has to do with that, right? I think we should be open, transparent, and specific. Minister starts at B1. If you come in the next election and you have 12 years as a minister, you start at B4. Right? While you're a minister, if you come back in and you're a backbencher, or you're on this side and you was a minister before, your salary comes down to an ordinary MLA. You get the 4 years credit as MLA that you put in, because you can't be a minister unless you're MLA, right? But you don't stay up there in the ministerial salary while you're an ordinary MLA. I think it is fair that the Speaker starts at B4, because I think it is appropriate for the Speaker to be elevated above an ordinary minister's salary. I think the leader of the opposition should be in B1 too. Because if we are going to continue to develop the system of government we have, which follows a Westminster system, we have to continue to develop the role of the leader of the opposition. The role of the leader of the opposition is an integral part of this democracy if we're operating under a Westminster form of government. And I believe the role, the leader of the opposition, because of the role that he plays in the House, the role he plays in society, the role he plays in interacting with the Premier and with other things like the National Security Council and stuff in government, and other positions where he has to make recommendations to the governor for the appointment of people, etc., 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 he should be at the minister's salary. Because here in Cayman, respect is highly related to salary. You know? It shouldn't be, but it is. The power of a civil servant is related to two things: salary and number of people you supervise. Mr. Speaker, I think that the deputies, that is, Deputy Speaker, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and parliamentary secretaries, because I'm wondering why we're not using the proper constitutional term, because it seems that we're likely to have the constitutional in place when this bill is brought into effect, and using the word parliamentary secretaries instead of this councillor, right? I think those people should be in salary scale C. You start at the bottom. For every 4 years that you're a councillor, or deputy leader of opposition, or deputy speaker, you get one increment in that scale. If you're no longer a councillor, deputy leader of opposition, or deputy speaker, you fall back to the MLA salary. I think all MLAs should be in salary scale D. Start at point 1, and you get one increment for every 4 years you have served. I think that is open, is transparent, and anybody who asks us what does MLAs get paid, you show them a law. And the reason I linked it to civil servants' salary scales in 1987 was because it moves with the cost of living. Because civil servants' cost increases are given by salary scales. So when the salary scale moves, we will move too. We shouldn't have to come in here every year and fight over what we're going to get paid. There should be a system established that is automatic, it is fair, it is honest, it is transparent, and that's the system. Mr. Speaker, I believe we have a duty to those who follow us and who aspire to represent the people of this country, to put these kinds of systems in place for people to aspire, to want to leave their lucrative professions and come in here and represent the people. Because we should have systems in place that attracts the brightest and the best of Caymanians. That's what we want. So, Mr. Speaker, it's up to the electorate to elect who they feel can earn these salaries. It's up to the electorate to hold us accountable that we're earning our salaries. You know? And it's up to us to ensure that when we go to the bank at the end of the month and collect our salary, we have earned it. And I think everybody in here, I believe, earns their salary and more than what they're currently getting. Because I don't think it's unique for me that what I have to use to assist people in need in my community goes beyond the constituents' allowance every month. Right? And we all have to dip in. Because we're not talking, you know, and again, this is not vote buy-in or trying to influence people for election. We are helping people that genuinely need help. Because oftentimes, the bureaucracy of getting it done in government is so difficult. And by the time you get it done, the person has passed on to whatever their reward is. So when we are approached by some of these people, it would be inhumane of us to tell us no, to tell the person no. It would break your heart. You couldn't sleep at night if you have any conscience at all. But every little time we have a shake-up in the economy, the first thing those out there who making the millions shout is, we need to cut MLA salaries. Yeah, the Premier needs to get his salary, you know? We need to cut in time too. When the crisis is here, right, and they are home or out to dinner, the Premier and his cabinet is sitting in the government administration building solving the problem often that they created. And the first thing they come out with is, we should cut MLA salaries. Because we realize when you cut the salaries of the MLA, many times you're hurting the people they represent. Because all of us know from experience that the demand on our electorate on us for help is not small. And it is not only people who work in the system. Yeah, we got one or two. You know, we see them outside there when we come into the LA. They know when this is going to meet better than I do. Right? Those are not the kind of people I'm talking about. I'm talking about people at our constituency level that genuinely need help. And we have to find a way to help them. So, Mr. Speaker, I fully support this bill. I congratulate the Premier and his government for getting it here. The time is now. We need to get it done. But I will argue in committee stage for some changes that I believe will improve the functionality of this place and the transparency that people expect of us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable the Deputy Governor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my support to this historic bill that will see the Legislative Assembly become an autonomous institution independent of the executive branch of government. Mr. Speaker, I know that this is a particularly special day for both you and the Premier and others in this House who has been advocating and championing this cause for quite some time. Certainly, as head of the civil service, I am also pleased to be able to be part of this historic occasion. As the Premier said earlier, this intent has been around for quite some time, long before my time, but I'm happy that with the help of my team, we were able to bring this bill here today. Mr. Speaker, as was said earlier, the motion calling for the independence of the LA was passed many, many years ago, and the motion required that responsibility for the administration of the Legislative Assembly be assigned to the Honorable Speaker and managed by the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say that the bill before us today achieves the end result of the motion. Mr. Speaker, you have heard the Honorable Premier outline the work that has been taken since then, and today he was able to introduce the bill, which will allow for the establishment of a management commission to carry out the independent management of the administrative functions of this Assembly. The bill makes provisions for the autonomy of the Commission by creating a unique entity whose defining characteristics will be similar to an independent office, such as the Office of the Ombudsman. The change that this bill will facilitate is of fundamental importance, namely that it will allow for the doctrine of separation of powers to be recognized and observed, and will see the executive and legislative branches of the government become independent of each other. Considering that the Premier has already outlined the organizational structure and function of the Commission, I will use this opportunity to provide a brief summary of the work the Civil Service has done to prepare for the enactment of this bill, as well as to share with you some of the plans for managing this historic transition. Mr. Speaker, it is intended, and I understand that we have agreed that once the bill is assented, it will become effective on the 1st of January 2021, which will allow for a seamless transition into a new budget year without requiring any extraordinary accounting measures to facilitate the creation and transition to a separate budget. Irrespective of the implementation date, the enactment of this bill will constitute a major change. As such, we have built in a transitional period for current employees of the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, provisions are that persons who are employed and appointed as a public office to this Honorable House, inclusive of the clerk, prior to the date of this commencement of this bill, shall be deemed on that date to have been lawfully appointed by the Commission. During the initial 9 months of the law taking into effect, a person employed by the Assembly may indicate that they wish to remain with the Commission or whether they wish to return to the core civil service. You will have heard the Honorable Leader of the Opposition speak about that this morning and the importance of taking care of the staff who are here. Where a person indicates that they wish to return to the civil service, they are required to give us notice within the first 9 months of the Commission being established. This provision has been made to ensure the continuity of the Commission by allowing sufficient time to contemplate and resolve the potential implications of staff changes. Where existing staff select the option to remain with the civil service, redundancy provisions will apply, beginning with an exhaustive effort to accommodate those persons in other roles within the wider civil service. On the 23rd of September, the Chief Officer of the Portfolio of the Civil Service met with the Speaker and staff of this Legislative Assembly to discuss the impending changes, including outlining the transitional period and the options available to staff that I just mentioned. Chief Officer Macfield Nixon also laid out plans to support staff leading up to and after the bill is enacted, namely the provisions of support for the LA's finance team and support in developing internal policies and procedures. Already, the POCS has bolstered the Assembly's finance team by embedding a member of our own finance team to assist with designing and maintaining the processes that will be needed to properly manage the finance function at the Assembly that is being facilitated through a 6-month secondment. Additionally, in the short term, the POCS Chief Financial Officer will continue to serve as a CFO for the Legislative Assembly, overseeing their accounts and managing the annual internal audit process. Mr. Speaker, it will be for the Commission and for the Council to decide whether they want to have their own CFO here once things are up and running. But certainly until that time, the Civil Service will be honored to help with their accounts. In addition, POCS has made arrangements for a member of our Management Support Unit to work with the staff of the Legislative Assembly. This dedicated resource will help the Assembly establish the desired working environment, mission, vision, workplace rules, and appropriate branding, just to name a few of the necessary high-level transitional tasks that the Assembly will need assistance with. This support will be available to this Assembly, to this Honorable House, throughout and for the period following the transition. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to hiring. The bills allows for the Commission to employ staff at such remunerations and terms and conditions, including medical benefits as it seems fit. Terms and conditions shall be equivalent to those under the Public Service Management Law. And just to say, Mr. Speaker, the member from Northside raised concerns about the word equivalent, and we're happy to take that under consideration. As the Premier said earlier, the intent of the bill is to ensure that all of the staff that are working here, whether they're employed now or they're employed later on, is to have the same terms and conditions as civil servants. The same pension benefits, the same health insurance, everything remains the same. We have no intention of reinventing the wheel when it comes to taking care of our most important resource, the staff here at the Assembly. As it pertains to the matters of budgets, separate 2020 and 2021 annual budgets have been prepared and approved for the Legislative Assembly. These budgets are separate and apart from those prepared by the Portfolio of the Civil Service, which previously included this Honorable House. So, Mr. Speaker, just to say that when we were putting together the 2020-2021 budget, we actually separated out the accounts for this Honorable House from then, so that come 2021, everything is separate. We don't have to go back and start changing things. So we have been preparing for this day for quite some time. Mr. Speaker, some will say that this bill doesn't go far enough and that it does not provide for a complete separation of this Honorable House from the Civil Service. Mr. Speaker, in a very limited extent, that is true. For example, while staff at the Legislative Assembly will no longer be civil servants, their terms and conditions, as I said earlier, will be governed by the Public Service Management Law in terms of pay, vacation, health, and pension benefits. Additional staff of this Honorable House will have a right to appeal HR decision to the Civil Service Appeals Commission. So there is a nexus between this House and the Civil Service. Mr. Speaker, we believe that any further strengthening of the Assembly's independence is best dealt with once this Legislative Assembly has been separated from the Civil Service. It will be up to the Council to decide what other provisions they would like to put in place to deal with these types of issues. But make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, once this bill is passed, this Honorable House will operate independent of the Civil Service. And also, Mr. Speaker, I think we all agree that if there's no need to reinvent the wheel, then we shouldn't do so. If things are working fine the way they are now, then just leave them alone. Mr. Speaker, having outlined some of the preparatory work that has been carried out, I am happy to assure you that we agreed that much thought and effort has gone into preparing for the enactment of this management bill. We have considered our people and built in reasonable timelines for them to work under the new structure and contemplate their options. We have proactively separated the Assembly's budget from my office and POCS. We have approved additional staff and we have approved additional posts and recruited additional staff to ensure that the Commission will have the necessary support to sustain its new operations. We have seconded staff from POCS to assist with the development of finance processes, and we have made provisions for dedicated management support resources to be available to aid with establishing the foundation pieces needed to underpin this organization. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this Assembly now is well equipped in relation to staffing, in relation to resources, in relation to budgets, in order to move on the 1st of January into an autonomous situation. Mr. Speaker, I am looking forward to that day. I look forward to the many changes that the Council will make to improve the overall operations of this Assembly, and I look to be benefiting from some of those important changes. I think I have heard some of the good plans that are in place, so I look forward to seeing those things happen. Mr. Speaker, the member from Northside raised the issues around salaries. I will only say that, Mr. Speaker, what's in the bill, it is what is present now. I certainly share his views that this could probably be improved on. Like him, I agree that we have to pay our members of Parliament very well. We are asking them to give up, sacrifice. We do want the persons of the highest caliber to represent us, both locally and abroad. So I will leave that to the members of this House for their good judgment. But, Mr. Speaker, I do want to, just like I said, emphasize that what's in here now is what's actually happening at the moment. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to provide you and the members of this Honorable House with the assurance that the Civil Service stands ready to aid the transition of the Legislative Assembly as it separates from the executive branch of government to become an independent institution. This change has long been envisaged and has been supported by the Civil Service. On the 1st of January 2021, until then, we will commit to putting in the necessary change management processes to ensure a seamless transition. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank all members of the Select Committee who worked for many months to create this historic bill. I also wish to thank Madam Clerk for all of her hard work. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the Cabinet Office, and in particular, the Deputy Chief Officer, Mr. Robert Lewis, who conducted research which greatly assisted the committee. I want to thank you and the Premier for continuing to drive this historic day. I think we're all happy to be here today. Finally, sincere thanks to the Chief Officer, Ms. Gloria McField Nixon, for her diligence and professional ability in the overall preparation and delivery on this key priority for the government. It's a historic day, Mr. Speaker, and I'm really happy to be here and be part of it. I thank you.
The Honorable Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to rise to give my support for the Legislative Assembly Management Bill 2020. I was one of the, as the Premier said earlier, one of the members of the committee last term, actually, that started looking at creating this bill and whatever supporting information had to go along with it to make this event possible. And I must say I feel quite proud today to actually be able to stand here and support this bill, because having been involved, intimately involved, I know how much work went into this effort and how many arguments were held and how many discussions. And it wasn't an easy task to get here. As the Premier said, it took quite a while for this bill to make its way to this Assembly, but I think it's timely given the soon to come changes to the Constitution. And I think things have aligned perfectly to complement each other. I know the Premier said yesterday that that I may be lacking in my understanding of the separation of powers, but I know that was just political jousting. I'm not going to give him any cause to get up and use his voice today. But I understand full well the principle of separation of powers and the necessity for the separation of powers. And I must say, last term being my first term, I was actually learning a lot going through this process with the more senior members of this Honorable House and the senior civil servants that were involved. So it was a good experience for me. I, like the member from Northside, want to urge all members to approach this with by taking the personalities out of it, because while we are so closely connected to this honorable legislature, and it does get personal and political in here at times, a decision such as this can't be made on that basis, because we have to legislate and look towards the future and look at what we're doing for the future. When I first arrived here, Mr. Speaker, I was in awe, as most new members would be. And, you know, I heard the terminology, you know, this real estate belongs to the people of particular constituencies. I heard that being said, and it took a little while for that to sink in to what it really means. But when I look around today, and I look at this, especially the more senior members, when they come in and they take their seats, it's done with a sort of a hidden secret body language. It's a sense, you can see the pride, and you can see the sense of ownership and the sense of honor that we take our seats in here. And, you know, I hear comments on the outside quite often about members of this legislature, and negative comments that hit at our honesty, our integrity, all sorts of things. We've all heard it. I'm sure we're all used to it by now. And sometimes you get the sense that people want us to devalue the honor of being here because of those criticisms and, you know, who do they think they are and they think they're better than us. But it's not about that. This is about representing a constituency, a large number of people. And we all know that we sometimes are that last phone call, that last bit of hope that someone has. And as a member from Northside said, you know, sometimes the sacrifices we make, we do without mentioning. No one knows. So I want to approach this debate today, Mr. Speaker, with that in mind, that we're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for all those who will one day occupy these seats after us. And it's not about us. It really isn't about us. I know we'll get the criticisms for doing it, but the people we represent are represented by these seats, and they deserve the best. So anything we can do to give them the best, we have to do it. And that's how I look at it. This isn't about me building a monument to myself or the Premier building a monument to himself or the leader of the opposition. It's about all of us building, if we're going to build a monument, it's to the people we represent. I look around the Commonwealth at other legislatures and parliaments, and what we're doing here today is not unique. What we're doing is common, very common, to put this sort of structure in place. We're coming from colonial days, Mr. Speaker, when the colonial power had the authority in here over the management and administration. We've evolved to the point where we have that, and that could only be a good thing. That's democratic progression and improvement over time. So while I do have some concerns with some of the things in this bill, overall, I think we can resolve those, but I certainly will be supporting the bill. And I think that it's a proud day for all of us to be able to do this. Mr. Speaker, I will speak briefly about some of the contents of the bill. But I wanted to start off by talking about what I was just touching on, was the progression and the improvement of our democracy. And I see this because I have a good perspective because I'm now chairman of the House Committee and also deputy leader of the opposition. So I come from that perspective as well. And I listen to some of the concerns of the leader of the opposition, just in terms of how we progress and move forward and offer more support to the rules on this side of the House. Because we must remember, in any modern democracy, you can't have a good government without an effective opposition on the other side. And we, as he said, we often end up in a position where we don't have the resources to be as effective as we can. And we end up, especially when it comes to researching bills, and I hear criticism sometimes that, you know, why don't you guys bring a private member's bill? And it's said as if it's an easy task, something easy to do. But we don't have legal drafters at our disposal. You know, we don't have the legal resources. I look at this legislature now, and I know, Mr. Speaker, you yourself and I have discussed some of the improvements that need to be done, just physically. The need for better meeting rooms, more meeting rooms. The Premier doesn't have an office here, the Honorable Premier. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition doesn't have an office here. But people come here to meet with them quite often. We have visitors, dignitaries coming from other jurisdictions. We don't really have the facilities to accommodate that. So there's a lot of improvements that have been lagging and hanging for quite some time. I'll give you a simple example, Mr. Speaker. The House Committee wanted not just a plaque on the lower portion of the wall outside saying what this building is. We wanted something a bit more prominent, because I've been out there and seen tourists walk up and say, what is this building? Just something as simple as that. It's been hanging for the longest time. You know, and it's, I'm not blaming anyone, but it's just that those things don't get priority. 36 years. So, you know, and again, this is the people's house. It's the people's parliament. And no one should walk up to this building and ask, what is this? You know, it's as simple as that. You know, we've made improvements piecemeal. We've improved the security and so on. But, and it's not, you know, I'm not trying to say that it's all to just to benefit us, but, you know, the people's house is a place of pride. In just going through some of the sections of the bill, Mr. Speaker, I still have, and I know we discussed this with the Honorable Deputy Governor, but I wanted to just underscore the structure and some of my concerns with it. I know the composition of the council. We talked about increasing that so it would be, I think, more equitable. But I raised the point about the commission being at the top level, and I know the Premier went to pains to try to explain that, and the council being under it. All that is fine, except that I found a conflict, because when you come to the composition of the commission, it's not really defined anywhere. And while the council sits under the commission, in my mind and my thinking when I first went through the bill, I figured, okay, the commission then, is it really necessary to have it? You could just have legislative assembly, because that's defined in the Constitution. And I'll come to a point later on why I bring that up, because, you know, I know we've sort of exhausted some of the discussions on that. But just those two layers, I think later on we'll see why I say that that may be a concern. Mr. Speaker, Clause 6.9 actually is a good thing. And I know that there must have been some anxiety among the staff of the LA just in regard to this change and, you know, what is to be expected. You know, I'm going to be working under the Speaker now. I'm going to be working under this council. Are things going to change? Is my job safe? But 6.9 offers that safeguard to the staff here, where they don't have to worry about any of that. They're going to be employed and continue to be working on the same standards, the same expectations as they were before under the Public Service Management Law. So I think that alleviates a lot of that anxiety. I also had a note about the wording around this vacation of office by a member, where it basically says that the appointment, where the Speaker makes the appointment, the Speaker can revoke the membership on the council. I think that should be worded to really make it clear that on the advice of the person making the recommendation. That would give comfort, I think, to both sides, that the Speaker isn't authorized to just simply remove people from the council. And when I say Speaker, I don't mean personally, I mean the position, the role of Speaker. Also, the section about conflicts of interest, Mr. Speaker, Clause 9.3. I mean, I understand why that is there. It's clearly a safeguard. But I do know that we do have protections already existing in the Immunities and Privileges Law to safeguard against any sort of adverse behavior. But I'm a bit concerned about putting that clause into this actual bill, because if you think about parliamentary procedure and how we govern ourselves, and if we're truly going to be independent, if a member here does something contrary to good governance or the law, then it would be up to the members of this House to deal with that, because there are immunities built into us while we're here, into our roles while we're here. So the convention is that the House deals with those issues anyway. I mean, I don't see too much harm in having it in there, but it made me stop and think that maybe it was in response to some of those criticisms I spoke about earlier, which are aimed at lowering the level of integrity that members of this honorable House have, that some people sometimes fire our way. And I don't want to pander to that or encourage that, but maybe that's why that was seen as necessary to alleviate any concerns or criticisms coming from the outside. But I can safely say this, this House is filled with honorable members, Mr. Speaker, and we have been quite able and capable managing our affairs as a legislature with no controversy in that regard. We have also recently implemented the standards in public life law, which gives added protection from any member taking advantage of a position in here. So I think what we have in place now is adequate. It works, but maybe that was put there for a very good reason. Mr. Speaker, going back to the structure, and this is why I wanted to raise that point, because 13.1, which talks about the structure. 13.1, the Council shall by order prescribe the executive, management, and administrative structure of the Commission for the necessary discharge of the functions of the Commission. Amend Schedule 1, which sets out the salaries and so forth. And then C, amend Schedule 2, which sets out the allowances. And then jumping on to number 2, an order under subsection 1, which is an order made by the Council, may be amended by the Commission, and any order or its amendment shall be subject to the affirmative resolution procedure. So I am taking that to mean that the Commission must be populated by warm bodies, and those warm bodies must be the members of the legislature. But it doesn't really specify that, so that provided some confusion for me, Mr. Speaker, when I was reading the bill, because I was thinking, well, what is this Commission? But clearly, if we try to tighten that up so that it makes it clear, because in my mind, the Legislative Assembly is defined in the Constitution, and I didn't see why we needed to have this layer of commission. We could just have Legislative Assembly and Council under it. But if we can clearly define that, then I think that would avoid any confusion. So, Mr. Speaker, hopefully that concern will be addressed when we get to committee stage. I do have a concern, though, and I may draw some criticism for saying this, but I'm going to say it because when we're talking about separation of powers, Clause 16.3, the accounts of the Commission shall be audited by the Auditor General in accordance with the Public Management and Finance Law. Now, I have no concern with that being audited. However, a subordinate entity under the control of the administrative arm of government auditing the Parliament may be a concern, separation of powers, which is, in my opinion. My preference would be that the accounts are audited, but done by an independent third party, rather than the Auditor General, because the Auditor General would then refer those accounts to the PAC. And that could get a bit messy. Section 16.3. That could become a bit messy. So again, I'm not against auditing and verifying and making sure things are done cleanly, but I don't think the Auditor General would be the right entity to do that. Sections 19 and 20. I'm not sure why we have two sections dealing with sort of the same thing. One for the chief officer and one for the staff. But that's to deal with discipline and appeals to the Civil Service Appeals Commission. I mean, it's just a suggestion that we could all put that under one section. I don't see the need for two, but again, it's just wording, so. Mr. Speaker, also 23.1. I would much, and I stand to be corrected if I got this wrong, but the making of regulations for this law, maybe that should be done by the council, not cabinet. But I'm not sure why we say cabinet, because the governor sits in cabinet. So again, there's that dividing line between the powers. But that's also a suggestion that I would make. But Mr. Speaker, as I said again, I am quite proud to be able to support this bill today. In my capacity as chairman of the House Committee, as I said, the difficulty I've faced getting things done is because the House Committee really doesn't have much authority when it comes to making the budget, creating the budget for this legislature. So while we sit and we agree things and things we'd like to see done, we can't action them, put them to action. And the budgeting process that goes on at the Government Administration Building is based on a different set of priorities, and sometimes things don't happen for various reasons. So that's the realistic situation. I know members sometimes get frustrated because things don't happen as they would like to see them happen. So this puts a bit more control in the Parliament to manage its own affairs and get things done. Mr. Speaker, I think I've covered all of the areas that concern me, the major areas. I won't touch on, I think Mr. Miller did a good job of covering salary and so on. I know he was very instrumental in coming to the arrangement, helping get to the arrangement that we have in place today. I know he made a lot of contribution to that. But again, I want to say that, we're doing this because we are moving our democracy forward. And I want to say to all those, Mr. Speaker, who are listening and who are watching, that not to view this as these 19 politicians doing this today for themselves. We're doing this for the generations of politicians to come, and those who want to be encouraged to go into politics. I hope one day maybe one of my children will follow the same course that I did. I never thought that I would until very close to 2013, when I'd made up my mind that I would get involved in politics. But we have a very robust youth parliament who come and showcase their debating skills to us once a year on Commonwealth Day. We have a lot that we can do with them that we want to develop to help those young people as well. This is another way and means of doing that as well. And giving them something to aspire towards as well. So as we move our democracy forward, as we move this parliament forward, as it will be very soon, this is one of the pieces of the puzzle to getting that done, Mr. Speaker. And while I pointed out some issues, some concerns that I had, overall, I am very proud today to be able to support this. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Last call. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, the member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think most of the substance of this bill has been covered by my colleagues on the opposition, and some of the concerns I had was also raised by the Honorable Deputy Governor. So there might be some minor repetition, but I'll make sure that I keep it within lines of the standing orders, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am excited about the notion of this Honorable House being independent from the civil service. It goes in line with international best practices. But I must say that much of what I'm going to contribute here today is a lot in line with what the elected member from Northside has said this morning or this afternoon. And it's not focusing on the fact that we should have a parliament or a legislative assembly that is independent. I think we all agree with that, Mr. Speaker. But about what we're going to be once it happens. And I want to start off by saying, Mr. Speaker, that I agree with the DG when he said that this law, or bill, should I say, is not perfect. And it's probably not gone far enough. But I do hope that when it's passed, that the Commission itself will slowly but surely improve the independence that allows democracy to flourish. Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to highlight some of the things that I heard so far that I also agree with in the bill. And one of the first ones I'm going to turn to may create some controversy, but I think it's important. Mr. Speaker, when I first got elected, I didn't quite understand the magnitude of what was expected of me, not only in this legislative assembly, but within my office and the necessary resources I would need to do what was expected of me. But that's only me as one elected person. I had the opportunity to serve under two leaders of opposition, and I must say that I feel the pain for both of them throughout their reign. That's why I'm going to be talking about the section on the Schedule 2, talking about the allowance for the opposition office of $2,500. And for the average person out there who may not understand the relevance of that, to put it in common terms, there's very, very little you can do to contribute to the role that is expected by the leader of opposition to hold a government accountable that has the resources in the tens of millions of dollars at their fingertips every single day. But we're expected to hold the government accountable in our role here in the Legislative Assembly with a mere $2,500. Mr. Speaker, as the elected member for Georgetown Central, I am in the heart of the city of the Cayman Islands. The rent alone for my office is over $2,000. When I started here, I was already paying well over $2,000 before I even got elected. And it is expected that the leader of opposition and its office should be in the town center of the country. Now, I'm not here to say what the cost of the leader of the opposition's office is, because I don't know. But I suspect it's somewhat close to that. And I recognize that, or I know that the civil service pays for an assistant for that office. But if you look at this bill on Schedule 2, that allowance is for rent, utilities, supplies, and maintenance. I know everybody in this country knows the cost of CUC. And for the first time in my life, I had to run and operate an office of my own. I was never in business that I had to have my own office. But if I was to tell this country what the cost of my supplies for papers, pens, ink, and all the rest of the stuff that goes with the office, they would probably be blown away. So to expect $2,500, not only for one office, but for the leader of opposition, who also represents, in most cases, would be everybody on the opposite side. So everybody else on the opposite side will have access to that office as well. So you're talking about up to the potential chance of 7 members. If I was to have a public meeting and just to print the 11 bills that is before this house and have a town hall meeting, I can probably use $1,000 just by printing the bills. So to be honest with you, it's unrealistic, and I know that talking about increasing costs is not an attractive thing in the public domain, but realistically, I recall, Mr. Speaker, being on the radio, and sometimes the good Dr. Steve Macfield says the opposition needs to do this and they need to do that, and you need to get this lawyer to do this, you need to do that. But they don't recognize that these things cost money. And that's why sometimes the opposition is unable to do many of the things we would like to do to hold the government accountable. We have to depend on charity by way of a lawyer may be able to say, listen, I'll give you some free advice, or do a report for you, or draft a legislation for you, or you depend on somebody who says, listen, I'll donate some cases of water and sodas or snacks to your office, so when constituents come to meet you, you can offer them at least a pack of peanuts and a bottle of water. Or you have friends that are in the business of supplies and say, I'll give you a 25% discount because I know you don't have plenty of money to pay for your office equipment. Mr. Speaker, for anybody who runs an office, they'll know that just ink for one printer can go up to $1,500. But yet still we're talking about $2,500 for the leader of opposition. Now, I'm not a part of the official opposition, but I want him. Pardon me, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, in the interest
The Honorable, the leader of the opposition.
in the interest of clarification, it should be noted, and I know the member wouldn't know this, but it should be noted that as leader of the opposition, I don't receive $2,500. I pay I pay for office supplies, I pay for electricity, I pay for but I do not pay rent. The government does that. The cabinet office does that. So I don't know where that $2,500, that may be what they pay for rent, but they're saying that it's here that is for rent, utilities, supplies, and maintenance. I do all that, but we don't do rent. Rent is paid for.
So you cover, what you're explaining is that you cover plenty of your costs yourself.
Out of my pocket.
Personally.
Well, out of the 5 of us pay all those things, electricity, telephone, all that.
Just for the clarity, so that I understand it, that you're talking about the leader of the, you're not talking about your district.
No, sir. I'm talking about the leader
Of the opposition.
Well, we like saying it's the opposition office, but the government pays the rent for that in the center there on Windward Center on Smith Road. and then we pay all of the expense in there.
Yeah.
So, but that comes out of each member contribute monies to that to cover utilities and supplies and maintenance, like cleaning and whatnot. All that is paid out of our pockets.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope Mr. McLean will give me back my 3 minutes in his next debate. I said, I hope you will give me back my 3 minutes in your next debate. Mr. Speaker, the point I'm saying here is that to administer democracy, sadly in this day and age, is becoming more and more expensive. But the value of democracy sometimes do not equate to the expectation of the public. Because it's so important that, though I have no intentions of being on the opposition side ever again after this election, if the good people of Georgetown Central allow me to be their representative, I understand the importance to have an efficiently run, effective opposition to hold the government accountable. It's a key role in democracy. Key role. Because we never know when somebody may feel that they're too strong or too bold. So, Mr. Speaker, in particular for that area, when we get to committee stage, I will hope that the government reconsiders that. And Mr. Speaker, I know that the Honorable Premier is fully aware of that difficulty, because when I was given the opportunity by the good membership of the Progressives to run with them, I remember having to go around to all the members and collect money from their personal pockets just to keep the Progressive office running. So he understands. And sometimes we choose not to say anything, because if you say something, you get political licks for saying that you want more money to help represent the people. But I don't think that we should be scared of talking about this truth, because here's why we shouldn't be scared about it. Because we know we need to do it to be effective in our jobs for the people. So if we can't get it from the people, we're going to ask for it somewhere else. And what I'm worried about, Mr. Speaker, is if I have to ask somebody else for the help, that's when they start to call you back and say, you remember when I gave you a discount? Or you remember when I donated this to you? And then when I'm in the position of power, they may come back and say, I need a favor too. I don't want to be owing to anybody other than my people. Beholding, thank you, Honorable Premier. I don't want to be beholden to anybody. And I hope that the people understand the point of asking for more resources is so we don't have to ask anybody else who's going to come back and ask for a favor. Because in most times when they ask for those favors, it's not in your best interest. But we still have to get the job done for you. And I want us to remember, it's not about the individuals in these positions, but the position itself. It could be your son, your daughter, later on being the leader of opposition, or being the premier, or being the speaker. And you want them to be effective in their role and their duties. So if you think the government is going out of line, make sure that the leader of opposition and his team has enough resources to keep the government in line. And also vice versa, the government has to have enough assistance with what they do so they don't have to be beholden to anybody else. So when the special interests call them, they can say, no, I'm sorry. I get paid enough, I have enough resources to me, I don't need to get anything from you. Mr. Speaker, I think I've dwelled on that point long enough. Mr. Speaker, there's another point that, and this is no knock on the current premier, because I don't think he would ever do such a thing. At least I would hope not. And I think I can confidently say I don't think he would do it. But, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member from Northside highlighted it a little bit in Schedule 1 under minister pay grade, where it says minister earns base minister salary, i.e. grade B, plus 1 increment for each 4-year term completed as a minister, but shall not earn more than the deputy governor. And the second part is the part that concerns me, because it can be used in a very malicious way. And let me read. It says, in addition, at the discretion of the Premier, may earn additional increments on grade B, but shall not earn more than the Deputy Governor. Now, in the average, for the common man's understanding, basically the Premier has the ability to say, you know what, Minister, I'm going to give you a little extra. Or, you, Minister, I'm going to give you a little extra. Now, Mr. Speaker, I just had a little off the sidebar discussion to try to understand the reasoning behind that. And in interest of transparency, the logic that was put to me was that sometimes you have more experienced individuals in ministerial positions with longer terms. And though I see merit in that, Mr. Speaker, I also see the danger in that. Now, if we want to put in a merit system that has an absolute to it to say, if you've been in ministerial position for X amount of time, you get X amount of pay. But to leave it at the discretion of the person who holds the position as Premier allows that person to have a leverage over his ministers. And I think it's one that gives the opportunity for the Premier to keep them in line, so to speak. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I said before, I want to reiterate it again. I'm not suggesting that the current Premier would ever do such a thing, but I always try my best to create a system just in case that monster comes around. And I think that that's what could happen there. Now, I'm not going to dwell more on that. I think you get the point of what I was concerned about. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk about my own personal experience now in going back to Schedule 2 about constituency allowance for $4,000 a month for each elected member. Mr. Speaker, I don't know about any other member, but I know running in Georgetown Central and being at the heart of the city center of the Cayman Islands, the cost for running an office is probably one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, in the islands. So I hate to compare, but Mr. Speaker, just the rent alone in a place like, and I hope the good member from East End doesn't mind me comparing East End, but I think it's exactly. So it seems as if he's okay with me comparing East End. But the rent in East End for a constituency office is probably about 80% cheaper than it is for rent in Georgetown Central. Well, I tell you one thing, you must got a house in East End for that. That's exactly what he has. Okay, I understand. Well, Mr. Speaker, what I'm trying to point out is there's not an equal value for money in respect to my job on behalf of the good people of Georgetown Central. That's all I'm trying to highlight. Now, I don't know how to solve that problem. And I'm assuming that's where the challenge has been over the period of time to figure out how do you decide, well, a member in East End compared to a member in Georgetown where expenses are higher, what do you do? But I'll tell you this, Mr. Speaker, what they currently give me for me to do it the right way, to have an office functioning, to help people when they come to me, they want their resumes printed or assistance to create it or to hold meetings, to offer them a bottle of water or sit down late at night when electricity is running and AC running all night long. All of those things cost money. And I expect and I intend to do the job the right way. That's why my office has been open from before I was elected, and I had no intentions of ever closing it. So I think that that should definitely be re-examined. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me get off the money talk, because they'll say that I'm only talking about money. Mr. Speaker, one of the other things that drawed concern that I thought I would bring up in this bill is, and because I take my role and my job very seriously, is having all the necessary resources, not only in my constituency level, but also here in the Legislative Assembly itself. Because though the staff at the Legislative Assembly have been trying to do everything they possibly can to assist me as a member, I know that some of the things that they are doing now is outside the remit of what they were actually hired to do. And I think that they need to have staff with the professional skills and understandings and qualifications to be available there specifically to assist, particularly that of the opposition, I must say, because we don't have the resources that the government members have to help with many things like the drafting of bills, research on matters that have been before the House before, and what have you. Now, some days I feel bad for the staff here, because I'll come and take them off of a duty that they've been assigned to do, to go, listen, I need this addressed. And they'll have to stop doing what they're doing. What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is the Legislative Assembly is understaffed. If we genuinely want to go to the international approach to independence from the executive, from the civil service, we got to do it the right way. Mr. Speaker, if this country actually knew what the budget was for the UK Parliament, and they're running and how many staff members they actually have in there, they would be blown away. I think it's Mr. Speaker, though I understand and I recognize that they're a lot larger, but we're talking about in a ratio to the type of skill sets they have. There's some skill sets that we don't even have. A lot of people don't know that we don't even have a research library, one that we've been begging for in this honorable House for years. I've seen reports where, as you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm on the Standing House Committee, and we've been talking about this library, and I've seen reports previously of other members talking about the library where I can do my analysis appropriately and come prepared for a debate in this honorable House. We've yet to get it. And I know that I've been a part of a committee sending it to the civil service to say, can you put this in the budget so I can be more effective for the people of the Cayman Islands and those particular in Georgetown Central, so when I debate, I can give good debate that comes to good conclusions that better the people's lives that live in the Cayman Islands. But we can't get it. Can't even get a bench outside the back of the LA to sit down if you don't want to freeze to death up inside because the AC so cold. I never. Mr. Speaker, I was talking about a bench to go and sit down and enjoy the cool breeze of the Caymanian weather. I'm not sure what the Premier was speaking about. But, Mr. Speaker, another element that I think it's important for me to highlight before it slips my mind is there's a large piece of property behind the government building where the tower building of the Cayman Islands once stood. Now that the government has agreed that the port isn't moving forward, unless the Honorable Minister wants to dispute that again so the public can hear, I think it's time now that we allocate that piece of property to the Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I hear that we're being told that we can get a piece of it. I'm assuming he's talking about 90% of that piece, and I'll be fine with that. Mr. Speaker, the reality is we're a growing democracy. And our intention is to continue to be the heart and jewel of the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, you know this yourself, and the Leader of Opposition talks about how many times he had to go off and represent particular viewpoints of how we deal with our democracy in the British Overseas Territory way of administration. We've heard about how many other leaders in other jurisdictions call on our Honorable Premier with his esteemed accolades to represent the region. I believe that the Cayman Islands will be the future of democracy within the British Overseas Territory. And you see little snippets of us doing that. We're now the one who's heading up the natural disaster forefront. The UK looks to us to kind of manage things. And we're looked to as well from a parliamentary perspective. You know how many times I remember when they were calling you, Mr. Speaker, asking you for advice. And because we're becoming that strong and respected across the Caribbean, I think our parliament should reflect that and prepare for growth. And that's why I think that we need that property next door. So, Mr. Speaker, I think I was on the point about the Legislative Assembly staffing, but I want to put it in there that we should now start to consider, and the government should start to consider to let go of that property, because I don't think that dock is going to happen anytime soon. And they can find another holding location if they ever, if the cruise port ever was to be built, because it seems like that's still being festered around within the current administration's mindset. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to, as we transition from being under the civil service, when I say we, I'm meaning the Legislative Assembly and the staff, I want to take this opportunity to thank the members of this Legislative Assembly. They work very, very hard, and in my humble opinion, with limited resources and processes and systems to offer up what we see every day as a world-class parliamentary process. But if one would take an opportunity to actually look at other legislative assemblies or other parliaments, we rank in systems and efficiencies probably at the very bottom in the region. Many other jurisdictions that have a lot less GDP, a lot less strong, not as good as the economies as we have, but they make sure they put the necessary monies in their parliaments. Now, I don't know if it's because, the politicians always go, well, we need to have the best, but they will invest in the necessary systems as something as simple as a parliamentary library where parliamentarians go to find research and information. We don't have something as simple as that. I remember going to St. Kitts on one of my first trips. And St. Kitts and Nevis, Nevis Island was a very small one, and I went to one of where their parliament was, a very, very small parliament. And you went into their library. The library was almost the size of the parliament. And the only reason why the parliament wasn't really big is because of the historical nature of the building that they were in, and they didn't want to move from that because it had significance from a historical perspective. So they invest in their democratic process and their House of Parliament, the House of Democracy. We need to start doing the same and not be ashamed to do so. Mr. Speaker, the one area that I think that we should definitely start to focus on is the record keeping of the proceedings of this Honorable House. I want to say that since I've been here, there's been about 4 or 5 members in the Hansard department. Not 4 or 5 at any one time, but transitioning in or out of that department. And they go through hell trying to keep up with all the rubbish sometimes we be saying inside here, the gibberish, because we repeat so much, like myself, but they have to type out that every single day, type, and listen to us, type, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And they have to type exactly what I just said. Now, I think it's been running with only 2 members over the last 2 years. And I want to send a big thank you to them to keeping track of the information. Because that information is the history of our democracy. That's how I hold the Honorable Premier to account and the Honorable Joey Hugh to account when he says, don't worry, we're going to make sure that Markfield Lane is paved before the end of 2018. And when I'm ready to debate and I go back and find the Hansards, I can see that he said so on this day, and up to today, I still haven't got Markfield Lanes paved. That's the importance of Hansards, and I want them to be efficient. So when I call to hold the government accountable with a snap of my fingers, I can have those records ready to hold the government accountable. That's how important a little small area of this parliament is to the democratic process. Mr. Speaker, the other part we have to invest in is accessibility of the public to what we do in here. We have to make sure that just as efficient as we are through COVID-19, and we did everything from the laptop, from the computer, that we make sure that the public can have everything that we do in here by a click of their fingers and have it done in a consumer-friendly way. Because I'm no IT expert, but I am a good consumer by way of sometimes you go on websites and you go, I don't even know where this is. It's like a maze. You don't know what to look for or what button to click. We have to invest in those types of systems because accessibility to information is important to the democratic process because it holds us all in this honorable house accountable. So if they want to know if you've done something, they can say, you know what? The Honorable Roy McTaggart has done a good job because I can find the report. But if they can't find the report because of our inefficient systems that we have, they're going to say, but he's not good, he's not doing his job. I'm giving you real life examples of the importance of investing in the Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, another area that I want to move to, and I hope you give me the leeway to talk about this, because it involves yourself. Mr. Speaker, myself and the Honorable Member from Northside do not always see eye to eye. But we do see eye to eye on one thing, and that's the respect for time. When I put myself up for office, I expected to be in this parliament working more and being more efficient at what I do. All of us, matter of fact. I say that when we go in to this new phase, this new transition into being an independent legislature, soon to be parliament, that we start with new habits. And Mr. Speaker, I think you have the power of a leader to start telling people, listen, when I say 10 o'clock, I mean 10 o'clock. Because here's why. I am the youngest member in this parliament, and I have to fight myself from trying to pick up I'm going to say it how I want to say it, the nasty habits that we have in this honorable house where they say, I remember days sometime when I go, it's 10 o'clock, we're supposed to meet. And I say, all right, that's okay. I can be there at 10:20, because we're not going to get started anyway. And I have to say to myself, no. Regardless of whether that is true or not, you get there, Kenneth. Donna Bryan taught you to be there on time at 10 o'clock. But it becomes frustrating to me when the structure in this house wastes the people's time. when you tell the public that we're going to debate at 10 o'clock and they're sitting at home waiting at their smart TV and they have YouTube on, they want to know it's going to come on at 10 o'clock. And Mr. Speaker, that control is within your grasp. And I'm asking, because it sets an example, not only for me as a youngster, but for if you were to tell a young child, listen, we expect you to be on time for work, but we can't even be on time for Parliament, the most important house in this country, what kind of example are we setting? We could have been past this debate already, We've wasted in the last 3 days about 6 hours of time. And I wouldn't say wasted it, because we did have sidebar discussions. A lot of the underlying politics. I hear the Premier saying that we wasted 2 hours yesterday, but I don't think it was wasted. But he said that I wasted it yesterday in our discussions, but I think it was well used because we came to compromise. And I see that the Premier is trying to distract me again, but I will not be distracted from the truth. But those 2 hours yesterday was not useless because we got compromise. And I got him to commit to this country that he will meet and discuss about district councils in this country. Because he's going to promise the people that there will be a select committee which he will attend to come and get the people a good law on district council. So that time wasn't wasted at all. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to push my luck anymore in respect to that topic because you haven't said anything yet. I was sure that you were going to put me in line. But, Mr. Speaker, only God knows how much time we have left on this earth or how much more time we have left in this Parliament. I want to ask you to change the legacy of that chair, please, as we move forward to say, you know what, we're going to take it back to the old principle where when people knew what to expect in a timely manner. Mr. Miller is 100% correct. He's been talking about it for years, that we should be able to know exactly what is coming in a reasonable time. We should be able to schedule these things a little bit better. Of course, it's not going to be perfect because sometimes the government has things that come out of the blue. But that's become the norm. And we have to change that back. So I beg of you to consider that when we transition forward. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak now to some of the changes that were suggested by the good member from Northside in his notice of committee stage amendments. And I just want to give indications to the government as to which one of those, because I almost agree with 80% of what he's proposed. But I do agree tremendously with him in respect to, in clause 5.2, where I think that the council or the commission should be made up of at least 5 persons, 2 being from the opposite bench. I don't think that the makeup of 3 from government and 1 from opposition is fair. Because if we had a government which was closer to equal, like say for instance the suggestion of a 10-9 government, it wouldn't be fair to have 3 members from the government side who has 10 members and 1 member from the opposition side that have 9. And this has no relevance to the fact that I'm on opposition. Because as I said, it's my intention to be on the government side the next time around. But you make decisions not based on where you are now, but what you would expect to see a parliament to be even if you weren't there. So I agree with his amendment in clause 5.2. Mr. Speaker, I also agree with his suggested amendment in clause 3 that's saying that it should be, the commission should be selected by and consist of all elected members of the Legislative Assembly, at least in the very first sitting of every year or every term. I think that is the fair way to do it because it becomes transparent where it is live on air, live on YouTube, where everybody sees how it's done rather than appointments behind the scenes. Mr. Speaker, I'm just trying to make sure that I cover all the areas of note that I highlighted. But the last point I'm going to say before I close off my debate or my contribution is we as a legislature and the members that will be responsible for the decision to appoint the monies to this LA have to be prepared to make sure the funding is done equally and the resources have to also be available to the opposition side. And what I'm trying to get at is there's limited things that the members of opposition can do right now because the resources are not available to them. And I think the members of the government knows that they have the whole civil service at their disposal. I want the members to think that if they were on the opposition and we had a terror of a leader and a group of individuals running this country and you had no resources available to hold that person accountable for 4 years, what potential damage that can do. We must not be afraid to empower the opposition to hold you accountable. Accountability is only good for the system of democracy. It can only help the solutions that we find for the good people of Cayman. Because when you're doing the right thing, there's nothing to hide. So even if you think about it, say, well, the opposition may just get in the way, the only thing they can do is highlight the good that you've done. So never be afraid to allow the opposition the resources they need to examine your work. It's like saying to the teacher, I did my homework, but I don't want you to look at it. Mr. Speaker, I will be making some more contributions at committee stage, but I support the bill, and I hope that some of those committee stage concerns that I highlight will be embraced by the government and be willing to consider for change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, 2 members have referred to this matter of a starting time. And I think both of them have laid it at my feet. The rules of the House says that we should meet at 10 a.m., start at 10 a.m. When members arrive, is not in my power. The House operates on a quorum, which the House rules set also. If there is no quorum, then I will not be in the chair. So both members, please to understand that. When the House is meeting and we have to suspend, I set a time, and if we cannot come back at that time, then I will not be in the chair. I would say this though, because I'm not here in my first term. I've been here for 36 years, 9 terms. And I've been on both sides of this House. And the issues that have grown from November, that I was here in 1984, to today, is not the same Cayman that it was then. The issues that affects us hits government nearly every day. Well, every day. I know that. Now, I was criticized too. But I know, and that's what I know, that members on government also, not just on my left, but members on my right, and particularly members on my right, because they are the government, have a tremendous amount of people, a tremendous amount of issues that grips them every day, and they have to be meeting down here. They meet before they come here. And the same way that people come to my house at 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning, I believe other members are getting calls and are addressing those needs. What this country don't understand is just that, just how many people comes to all of us. And so I empathize and sympathize with that. Yes, we know that we have a set time to meet at 10 a.m. We know that if we suspend and we say 2 o'clock, then that is when we are expected. But many things, many things that our public do not see that impacts on that time. And that's a fact. And we remember this, that the government is not 40 or 50 people. And the cabinet is not 15 or 16 people. So they are meeting all sorts of issues, just the way the same the leader of the opposition has to do, the same way as all members on my left have to do. And I know what I still go through, because I see people from all over this country, and as I said, people come on my porch. And those that know where my room window is, they're knocking very early in the morning too. So let us understand that. And that is something, though, that we can talk about, but I don't think that we can justify ourselves by criticizing each other and saying we're not meeting on time, or that we're out of respect for the chair. I don't count it that. I haven't counted that. I feel bad when they say that everybody else should get a raise, but the speaker mustn't get no raise. I don't know if that's love of the speaker or what. However, I do not take it as any insult, and I certainly do not have the power. Mr. Bryan, member from Central Georgetown, to say when members can be in their seats. We should be there, but far too many things impact on us. The member from Cayman, they depend on a flight most time to get here. And she's likely to miss her flight this afternoon to get back up to attend to her people. But that's what we face as a parliament, as a legislature. So when we criticize, let us be mindful of those things. And one of these days, just as you say, you hope to be on the government side, you might be there and you might face the same issues.
Mr. Speaker, if you would allow, I just want
we have reached the hour of 4:30, and I would ask the member of finance, the Minister of Finance, for the
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
suspension of standing orders.
I beg to move the suspension of the relevant standing orders in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption, or 4:30 p.m.
I should say to members that it has been decided that we would finish this bill hopefully shortly, and then we will adjourn until Monday morning. After we finish this bill, we won't go into other business until Monday morning, God's willing. Question is that the standing orders be suspended in order to continue after the hour of 4:30 p.m. All in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Business will continue until this bill is complete.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, in all parliaments, I know at that time that is what is said. Suspension, if you look at Hansard's of other parliaments, suspension of standing orders, only when somebody as meticulous as yourself calls the point that we must say the specific standing order. I take it that members know the particular standing orders under 10.2.
Mr. Chair.
You have this final say, so I'll leave that.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Chair, I just want to give a public apology to you in respect to laying the blame at your feet in respect to the timeliness of members of this honorable House. And you are 100% correct. It is not your responsibility. So I would just encourage my colleagues.
Honorable Member, I think you have made yourself clear. Time is important. And so we move on.
Remember what he used to say, though? He wasn't coming in, the government job made quorum, not the game.
Well, you know, honorable members, I will give you all a lesson on that, of this thing of the government is responsible for the quorum. One time, 2 leading members of this House would refuse to come in to make the quorum, and we were in the budget session. And I sent one of my members out, and they believed that I had no quorum, and they saw the member out. They refused to come in. They walked outside and walked out of this building. I called my member back, moved that the budget be accepted in totality. And when they came back, they had nothing to say. So be careful. Be careful, honorable members, when you say that the government must make up their quorum.
Mr. Speaker, it would
They were members of the opposition.
I know that. I believe that it's nice for you to tell us about these stories, but it would be much nicer for you to tell us the 2 members that it was.
It's good enough for me to say that it wasn't you. You were absent that day.
Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence, sir.
Georgetown, unless you're raising on a different point of order, I think we really have.
Just a point of order clarity, Mr. Speaker. Because I publicly just apologize to you in respect to your responsibility, but you just highlighted a very interesting point, which is once the members are on this property line, you have the authority to order them to these chambers. So I want us to also recognize that
I don't know where you heard that from, because that's not what I said. I didn't say that I ordered them back.
Mr. Speaker, if I can clarify and without trying to step out of my boundary here, I'm speaking about the timeliness of people being to the chamber. Once they are in these proceedings and this precinct, you have the authority, if I am not mistaken, to order them to the floor of the House to address matters.
No, it's not that. No, you're absolutely wrong. I gave you a bit of what political strategy can do. The House was sitting, like the House was called, and they saw that I had no quorum because they picked up and left saying, you have no quorum. Does any other member wish to speak? The member for Bordentown West. I hope we have not taken up too much of everybody's time in those informational parts of this meeting.
Mr. Speaker, I really didn't plan on speaking on this bill because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I am not 100% convinced that this bill is needed at this time, but at the end of the day, I do recognize that it is a step in the right direction in terms of advancing our parliamentary democracy. My reservation, Mr. Speaker, was more along the lines of costs, because as it stands right now, we do receive substantial support from the civil service in particular. And when I look at some of the requirements that would require it to be a standalone entity, I needed some level of comfort that this move would not increase additional costs, especially at this time. But in principle, I think it is the right step in the right direction in terms of advancing our democracy. And especially since we're getting ready to move to our parliament. What I would like to raise, Mr. Speaker, and I think I just sent you a copy there with the page, was I noticed some of the members was touching on salaries and office expenses and all those kind of things. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, you put that, never mind, I'm not going to get into that. Yeah, no, I'm not going to say it. I'm on mic, I'm not going to say it. Yeah, but anyway, Mr. Speaker, one of the things I noticed members are speaking about this, getting into the salary details, the office expenses and all of that. And I just want to draw members' attention to the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority. And just to read it briefly, Mr. Speaker, is that the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, IPSA, is a public body in the United Kingdom created by the Parliamentary Standards Act 2009, largely as a response to the parliamentary expense scandal of 2009. It establishes and monitors the expenses scheme for members of the House of Commons and is responsible for paying their salaries and expenses. Following revisions to the Parliamentary Standards Act in April 2010, via the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010, IPSA was also given responsible for setting the level of MP salaries. I believe, Mr. Speaker, if we're going to go down this route of having the Legislative Assembly and soon to be Parliament as a standalone entity, recognizing that in the United Kingdom there are these issues already, if we're going to do it, we might as well set it up right from now and start putting in the separate bodies from now to remove any of those conflicts, because I think it's wrong for us as parliamentarians or anything to be getting into the salary dispute. And I think even within the civil service, that is something that needs to be done by an independent body, as opposed to having the people who are benefiting from the increases discussing increases. So I think was one of the things that we can look at to see what the UK did, because ultimately, as with any process, it may be open to abuse, and at least we can start putting these structures in place from now to at least avoid those kind of things. Because a lot of time was spent discussing salaries and who should be tied to what band and this and that and whatever. My views in terms of the Premier salary and even that of the Deputy Governor, I've said it already and I'll say it again, is that it is not that some members of the statutory authority is getting paid too much, is that those officers are getting paid too little. And we need to recognize that if we want talent, not only inside this Parliament or even within the central government, we're going to be competing with the big firms, the law firms, the accounting firms. And no offense, Mr. Speaker, but we need to basically do a better job of attracting people, but ultimately that's not for us to decide what the income should be. I think an independent body can do that, and I think we have sufficient expertise on Ireland that can do that, to recommend that. But I do believe, as a matter of record, as in most places, the highest paid public servant should be the Premier of the country. And I even think he should get paid more than the Governor, and that's just my view. One of the things, Mr. Speaker, I just want to touch on also is that members also brought up the issue of time. And one of the things I would suggest that we seriously look at, especially if we're looking to grow the Parliament and mature the Parliament, is even the position of the leader of government business. Because in most parliaments, the prime minister isn't the leader of government business. There's someone that's actually sits there, manages the government business in the House, which also gives ministers and others the flexibility to move, come and go, and everything else. But that's the person who's more responsible for managing that kind of business. So again, if we're looking to move our legislative and our parliament forward and our democracy forward, we can learn the lessons from other countries around us, look at the mistakes that they have made, and then pretty much start to get there. My primary concern, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned before, is while I agree with the concept and accept the concept, because I still believe at the end of the day, one of the things that we as Caymanians need to do a better job of is believing in ourselves. I mean, at the end of the day, I can tell you, when I do speak to my sisters, my sister that lives in the UK, for example, and even my friends I went to college with, and they're so used to wearing masks and seeing exactly how we have even responded to the global pandemic. I mean, whether you want to slice it or dice it, Mr. Speaker, this COVID-19 crisis was a report card on every single government around the world to see exactly how they dealt with it. And when you see both the US president and even the UK prime minister catching COVID as protected as they are, and you get to see exactly how incompetent some of these governments were in their response to COVID, and then to see the job that, and give Jack his jacket that the government here has did, I think that is commendable. So I have no doubt in terms of thinking that we have the ability to do this. I know we can do this. We just need to start believing in ourselves more. What I would like to see, though, Mr. Speaker, is that there needs to be a culture change as we're moving into this. I think the Deputy Governor had mentioned in his contribution that they were looking for the 1st of January 2021 to start this process. What I would suggest to members is that we are now going to be taking on something that was previously managed by, I would like to say, the portfolio of the Civil Service, and everyone knows my respect for Chief Officer Gloria Macfield-Nixon is marrow deep. I think she's very competent, very professional, and also the team that they have that manages the current day-to-day within the Legislative Assembly now. So as we're looking to move to that, I just want to make sure that this council or this commission, as it is set up, needs to recognize that in the beginning there's going to be a lot of legwork, because in essence you're going out and creating almost like a new statutory authority to some extent. And I think we just need to make sure that we have the proper processes, procedures, and everything in place that we can basically hit the ground running. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to move the Legislative Assembly to where it needs to get to, but it starts with us as the members. And as you rightfully said, in terms of starting on time, we have no one to blame but ourselves, but also we do recognize that in some cases, I've seen the ministers themselves early in the morning huddle up, working on different issues, and I can only sympathize with them because they still have a country to run and they still have a government to run, so there needs to be some level of flexibility. But at the end of the day, we still need 10 members to form a quorum. And sometimes, even if it's just to start the meeting on time and then leave and do your business, I think that should be done also. So it is a culture shift, but we ourselves just need to be prepared to start making that change. Just one of the things, Mr. Speaker, and I would like, and this is just the technocrat in myself, I would really like to see a plan laid out in terms of, as we transition in, when do we expect it to be transitioned out, or when we expect all of this to come in place. He says, we have set a date as the 1st of January 2021, but I would still like to see what that transition plan looks like. I understand that there was a gentleman that met with some people here in terms of trying to understand the needs and everything else that we need. So, but I would still like to see what the outline is, what that plan is, what that transition looks like. But outside of that, Mr. Speaker, like I said, in my caucus, I had my own reservations to this, but mine was more limited on the issue of costs. I don't think we should be looking to incur additional costs at this time, and I'm still waiting to get a better idea in terms of what costs we'll be incurring. Because I think in this COVID environment, as much as we are in a good place, I still think we need to be cognizant of costs and anything else like that. So with that said, I'm okay with the concept, but I still need some comfort on the cost. And maybe when the DG goes to wrap up, he can probably give me a better idea in terms of what they envision the cost would be as we do this transition. And then that will determine my vote on this particular issue. Outside of that, Mr. Speaker, I think what needs to be said has been said by many, but I would encourage this body to at least learn from the mistakes that the UK and other parliaments have made with regards to governance, start put the safeguards in place so we don't have to be spending any time here arguing over allowances, salaries, and everything, because those are stuff that we're all conflicted with. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will end my contribution, and thank you all.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the mover to reply, his right of reply. The Premier had to step out of the chamber, and he'll be back shortly. We did say that we will not go beyond this bill. The Premier is having quite a difficult day with his voice, and perhaps we should invite him or ask him to if he wants to reply on Monday morning.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think we even have a quorum to vote on the bill. I really don't have a whole lot to say in response, and I wouldn't mind taking the vote on the bill. We would consider the many suggestions that have been made in committee stage, but I would like members present to be able to vote. So I don't know, Mr. Speaker, you'd suggested that there would be a break at 5, but if members would return to the chamber, I can wrap up my winding up in certainly less than 10 minutes, and we could take the vote, and then we could adjourn until...
Please continue then, Honorable Premier. I think we have the quorum is in place. 5, 7, 9, 10.
Mr. Speaker, I'm duly chastened. I'm duly chastened by the great concern expressed by the member from Georgetown Central at time wasting, and I'm also observing that right now he is not here, so I presume he's out somewhere time wasting as well.
Attending to a constituent matter.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Or attending to a constituent matter.
But, Mr. Speaker, seriously, I wish to thank all members of the House who have spoken and those who have not for their either indicated or tacit support for this important bill. I've gone through it in some detail during the introduction, and the Honorable Deputy Governor, I think, covered off the other aspects of it that dealt principally with the transition and how this would affect the civil servants who are currently engaged in what is called the Department of Legislature, I believe it is. Mr. Speaker, the principal observations that were made, which I think we will have to, as a legislature, take a view on, is what we do, if anything, at this stage, which will put into statutory form what are generally practices with respect to the issues around remuneration and allowances for members of this House. What is reflected in the schedule, or I should say, what is in the schedule simply reflects the status quo, including, by and large, current practices. There are just a few modifications to the schedule, and none of those actually affect the amounts of money that would be paid. There would be no significant difference. So I've heard some compelling arguments made, not just about the amounts, but the basis on which it is proposed that those salaries be calculated, which I think are worthy of some careful consideration by the Deputy Governor and the Honorable Attorney General, as well as some of the others of us, about the legal implications of, or the wording, I should say, of the schedule. So I would want to take some time to have a look at that and to have a chat with members, not just members of myself, members of the House, before we come to committee stage, to see whether there can be general agreement on the way forward, rather than voting up or down committee stage amendments being proposed by various members. But that aside, Mr. Speaker, I think most or all members who spoke acknowledged the importance of the bill and the need for us to, as far as possible, ensure that there is proper separation of the executive and legislative functions, and that neither the reality or the perception of control over what transpires in this honorable House remains, that there is still some influence by the executive. As I think we've all acknowledged, these little islands, this little country has grown leaps and bounds over the recent years, and certainly in my lifetime. Sometimes I blink and shake my head and say, I can't believe that this is the place that I was born in. I like to think not so long ago. When we grew up with pothole, marred roads and beat mosquitoes, and many people struggled just to survive. Government had little, if anything, in terms of means to help anyone. Indeed, I heard my mother and father talk about the times when government used to have to borrow money from H.O. Marion to pay salaries. And to think that these years hence, we are at this point where increasingly our own people are in control of our destiny, is something that fills me with a sense of incredible pride. And the fact that I have had the honor and privilege to have been here for nigh on 20 years and to have been a part of much of this is something that I will always be incredibly, if quietly, proud about. And so, Mr. Speaker, I thank members. I have no argument with much of what any of them said with respect to this. I just hope that over the next little while before we come to committee stage, we can, as I say, come to agreement over a few of those issues, and that we can pass this bill. As has been acknowledged, it won't be perfect. I'm sure they're going to be growing, not growing pains. They're going to be teething pains with respect to this, it's settling in, and the first the first council is going to have I wouldn't say a difficult job, but it's going to be something that is new for all of us when the first council meets in January of next year, assuming the bill is passed and assented to, and we start to take responsibility for the management of this, the administration and management of this legislative assembly. So, Mr. Speaker, I really don't propose to say more than that. And grateful to members again for their support of this very important bill.
Question is that the bill be given its second reading. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill is passed. Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of this honorable House until 10 a.m. on Monday morning.
Question is that this House do now adjourn until 10 a.m. Monday, the 19th of October, 10 a.m. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. This honorable House stands adjourned until Monday, the 19th of October, 10 a.m.